All right, so you've got some good questions about the Simian line, and it's really it's what's interesting about the Simian line is that I've been really revising when I was rewriting my stuff last year. I was reviewing how I thought about the Simian line, and I've come up with some different sort of perspectives on it. So that's kind of why I'm interested in chatting this one with you. And I used to have this view that, you could look at the airline and see if it was an air-dominated line or a water-dominated line, and I don't agree with that perspective anymore. But I definitely had that perspective for a very long time. So let's start with this because this is a particularly classic. This is like um, the perfect kind of Simian line. This handprint and the other handprint that goes with it, which is that guy. So if you take the Simian line in its purest form, that's what it looks like. It is there is no other lineation on the hand. There is just the earth line and then the fusion of the air and water lines into one line across the hand. But I this what I the, when I was reviewing the stuff on the major water line, basically I came to the conclusion that the Simian line is actually a just a low-lying water line. I don't think there is a difference between a sort of water dominant or an air dominant. They're all water dominant in one kind of way. And so what you find is that, and the difference is to do with their cognitive functionality. So we know that the Simian line is incredibly common in the hands of those with Down syndrome. That much. Oh, actually, there was one right there. But that much we know. And as in fact, the Sydney line is quite common in people with Down syndrome as well. And so that's where the idea comes from. That's probably not the best example because it's a Down syndrome person which has got a very clear waterline. But I can just skip through these and find another example earlier on, which has got, there we go. So this is the same handprint. And I think this is really expressive of it because what you can see here on this handprint here, it's the waterline that's causing the problems. This is not, this waterline is just going straight across there. And in terms of like the levels that I was talking about there, like if you look at the kind of, well, that's the sort of earth level starting there, and that's the air level of the water line up there. What you're seeing is that this line basically is staying at its incredibly low level. So only when a water line goes up between the digits does the water line kind of reach this air section up here. And that's the communicative side of the water line. If the water line reaches up into the top section of that line, that area up there, then what that means is that the person can communicate their feelings, can articulate what's going on inside them. And when you find a break in that line, like a reduplication, there's a stutter between their openness of their emotional communication. And then if you got a line that's at the air level, then if you get a line that sort of stops in the fire level, then what that means is that emotions are only articulated physically or dramatically or expressively or sexually. And but or there's more restriction in how those persons articulate and emotionally express themselves. And so that's the kind of like that's like using that's like saying how far out of the hand does that emotional energy go? Are they able to articulate it or not? If it's staying at the fire level, they can't put it into words. So they don't put it into words, they do it through actions. There's a limitation in how they can express themselves emotionally. But what you have when you've got a lower line, and that's what happens when you've got a simian line, is essentially what you've got the line stays at this lower level throughout its entire course. And that's really like it's buried. It's never expressed. It's held in, and it's kind of restricted in that kind of way. So the impact of that is the effect that it has on the mind, on the cognitive processes within the person. But essentially, what's problematic here is the emotional energy that's problematic. The emotional energy is not coming out through the fingers. It's staying at that particular level in that kind of way. So what we know with Down syndrome, one of the key things that we know with people with Down syndrome is they have congenital heart defects, which is obviously also indicated by the higher incidence of displaced axial triradii. And they may have simian lines in both hands, but since simian lines occur in 55% of cases of Down syndrome, that means it occurs in basically one hand. And this is what you've got here. So you've got one hand with a simian line, and one hand, which is the normal waterline, nicely normal waterline. So that's the first thing to look at. Is a Simian line unilateral or bilateral? A bilateral Simian line is different in its signification than the cases where there's only a Simian line on one hand and not on the other. All right. But in all cases, I think what that shows is it's there's something out of whack with the emotional energy of the person. In the case of Down syndrome, it's overwhelming everything else, and that's all they've got. They don't have the cognitive function. Their airline's kind of wiped out. In non-Down syndrome people, their lives are driven by their emotionality. And I was looking at this the other day because very famously, I read The Hands of Tony Blair in 1998. Um, and Tony Blair has a Simian line. I'm not sure if he's in this particular folder, but here's another example of someone with a Simian line, and that's Robert De Niro.
Mm.
So he's got a non-Simian line in his right hand, but he's got a very clear Simian line in his passive hand. And
Yeah.
one of the things the Simian line is the thing that has made De Niro such a great actor. But he's particularly good at playing psychopaths, mafia bosses, criminals, you know, people who are insanely violent and insanely kind of have no compunction about it. And he's convincing. He's scary as shit when you're watching a De Niro movie because he's like, he seems like he's such a good actor. He's not a good actor. He's just being his simian line. It's like he's just thrusting his simian line out there. And notice he's got a long ring finger. All right. So, which is what
Yeah.
you'd expect in the hand of an actor. So he's able to harness the intensity of the energy of the simian line
Mm.
and put it out there. So the cold-blooded killer, the person who's got all their energy focused on the objective of what they're doing, sublimating their emotional energy. And all the characters he plays in those movies have disastrous relationships with the women in those stories as well. Or if they have any relationship at all, it's nearly always abusive and or sexually degrading. I'm not saying De Niro's like that. I'm just saying he's able to portray that criminal violence, which obviously not just in the casino, but outside of the casino as well. So De Niro's a really good example of that. I think, yeah, here's another shot of him with the Simian line there. So the Simian line is so what's happening with the Simian line is the emotional energy is not articulated and expressed in the way that we would hope and the way that we would hopefully express itself. And what I've come to see about the waterline is when the waterline ends between the fingers here, what that denotes is an emotional sensitivity,
Okay.
which is by means like people who are sensitive to the environment in a similar way to actually to the radial loop, but like being able to tune into and pick things up from the environment. And what you notice when you're looking at the hands of criminals, as you've probably been seeing in the hands that I've been posting on Patreon, is so many of them have short water lines that only go there, and they've got that kind of insensitivity. And so the Simian line is kind of like just like that, but even worse. It's kind of like it's not going up the hand at all. It's staying completely low and across the hand. And it's also seeking grounding in the beginning of the earth line. That's where it's going to. It's going to that. And what do we know about water lines that go to the earth line? Well, we know that they're insecure. There's a neediness that they have. And so what this manifests is the behavior that you see with people with similar lines, which is obsessiveness, jealousy, possessiveness. I mean, one of the reasons why they get so angry about things, because they get so possessive of their partner, and that just comes out in those kind of behaviors, and they can be quite intense and quite violent. But there's an intensity to them that it comes from that, but it leads to obsessive behavior and possessive behavior. So I don't think the stimming line really is. I mean, you've got all those things like ruthless, suspicious, heartless, merciless. I think those probably things are those true, but those are kind of it's like an emotional deficiency because the water line isn't going up. it isn't reaching out to the world and to other people. It's staying in and it's held in. It's kind of super selfish. So it's like super selfishly focused upon the priority and prioritizing the needs of that person. I mean, let's take another example.
Question.
Oh, look, here, Joaquin Phoenix has got one as well. I mean, these are actors with them, so they're kind of there's a consistency about that in terms of, again, Joaquin Phoenix is really good at playing, intense characters, whether it's a Roman emperor or the Joker. It's he's got those kind of that he's able to portray the kind of madness and psychopathy in those places. Yep.
So, in your analogy of the Simian line being the emotions and the your cognitive functions being fused, like the hooker falls, your metaphor there. So, does that mean that because your emotions are just like the rapids or the hooker falls, it's a channel, they're not expressed, you're being taken away by this current of emotionality because you're being drawn into this current, you're just absorbed with yourself because you can't get out of that. You can't
Yep.
think of other people.
Yep. And someone like Hillary Clinton or Tony Blair are really good examples of that. You know, maybe I can pull it up, but I had this piece that I wrote about Tony Blair. I've actually got it right here. Yeah, here we go. And I wrote it in 1998. Um, and it was, I mean, so he'd only been in power a year or so by that particular point, but it was published in the Times, and I basically say, what I say to him basically is Blair is not intellectually retarded, but his emotions are subservient to his intellect. He is on a mission, and he's going to be very, very good or very, very bad. It's very unusual. He will change things radically. And what I didn't know at that time, of course, that they were going to get rid of Clause 4 from the Labour Party manifesto and turn the Labour Party into Tory light. That wasn't apparent at that time, but that's exactly what he did. And he's absolutely fanatical. He's an absolute it's Biden. He's went on him. He's absolutely fanatical human being, and totally obsessive about that. Let me see if I can actually find his actual handprint. Just a minute. And he was on a mission, and his mission was to reinvent the Labour Party and to turn the Labour Party into something else, i.e., to get it elected. But basically, what he did was he turned it into the Tory Party to get it re-elected. Where are you? There you are, right there. There you go. And that includes all sorts of things that you could justify. The one thing I think is extraordinary about him, I mean, he is a war criminal and he's had quite a number of private applications to him to be taken treated as a war criminal, called as such. But he's absolutely completely unrepentant about the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Sees that he did absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever, doesn't think there was, even though it's now known that there were no weapons of mass destruction, even though, it's against international law to bomb a country without provocation, which, that's a war crime. It literally is a war crime. He is literally a war criminal. But, how do you sleep at night? Well, I sleep very well, I mean, when I made that decision, I consulted with God and God told me, yeah, I'm a Christian. I mean, he's an absolute total raving psychopath. But that's, so that obsessional quality comes from that because and he's obviously quite smart, and so but all that energy goes into justifying everything that he does, and so all that energy is put into that, and and there's no sympathy and no empathy for other people. He's, in that sense, so I think it's not correct um, the see that is a that it's to do, is it water dominant or air dominant, or the confusion between thinking and feeling. It's the merging of thinking and feeling, and therefore the inability to sort of stand outside and be objective, and just get totally consumed by whatever passionate intensity is overwhelming you in a particular moment. And so where you've got someone like Blair with a long index finger, he's doing it on point of principle and political a political platform, with someone like Joaquin Phoenix De Niro are doing it in an acting form. So they're actually acting it out. You know, they're actually performing that and performing it incredibly convincingly. Does that kind of clarify about the two lines, about the what
Yeah,
the
yes,
Simian
it
line?
does definitely. Yeah. So yeah. So I know the final question I've got
All right,
on
I'll just stop that one there because that was the Simian line. That'll do.